What was Jackson's main focus? What did he want to do, Mackenzie, to Native Americans that were living east of the Mississippi?
Push them.
West of the Mississippi, because he thought they would be better off there. He thought they could have their own way of life for a time being until they decided to convert to the white man's way of life. And he wanted them out of his way, basically. So he talked Congress into passing the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And the first resistance was by the Sauk and Fox Indians of southern Wisconsin and northern Illinois. And white forces moved in. And in 1832, they had what was called the Black Hawk War, where Indian leader Black Hawk and his followers fought bravely and skillfully, but were finally overwhelmed by the military and forced into the Indian Territory. Then we told you that the Creeks and the Choctaws and the Chickasaws and the Cherokees and the Seminoles, a lot of them had adopted the white man's way of life, living in places like Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. And those tribes became known as the 5 civilized tribes. And I said by the end of 1833, everyone except for the Cherokees signed removal treaties and agreed to move west of the Mississippi. The Seminoles...
I thought he said,
what's that?
everybody except the Seminoles?
Well, but we'll talk about that. I should have said everybody but the Seminoles and the Cherokee, because that's what's going to lead us to the Trail of Tears. So the Creeks and the Choctaws and the Chickasaws are the ones that signed that removal treaty. The Seminoles refused to sign, which led to the Seminole War, right? Which lasted till 1842. And when they were defeated, they moved westward, but where did a few Seminoles hide? Florida Everglades. Now, I probably did mess you up yesterday by not clarifying that. The Cherokee also did not agree to the Indian Removal Act, and they did not sign those removal treaties. And that'll take us then to the next subtopic, which is the fate of the Cherokee Indians. Because they are going to refuse to sign the removal treaty also. Now, I'll tell you something about the Cherokee Indians. They were very organized. I'm going to give you 4 examples of how organized a tribe they were. They weren't some, low-life group of people that had no vision, and they needed to be pushed west of the Mississippi because they were just in the way. I'll give you 4 examples how the Cherokee tribe was actually very organized. First of all, they developed their own written language. A lot of Indian tribes had their own what? Spoken language, but very few had their own written language. And the Cherokee did have their own written language. They even, number 2, published a newspaper in their own language. So they were way ahead of the game as far as communication went compared to some of these other tribes. So they realistically might have been the last Indian tribe that should have been moved west. Okay? They had their own written language. They published their own newspaper in their own language. They even supported schools for their children. They put their children in schools, not white man's public schools, so to speak, but they were educating their own. They were putting their own children in schools. They supported schools. They even had their own, number 4, their own written constitution. And what would you have in a constitution? We talked about what we were lacking when we became a country. What did they have in that constitution? Laws, law enforcement, and a judicial system, right? They had that in their constitution already. So this was a very organized tribe, and they did not really believe that they needed to move. Well, we kind of left them alone for a little while, but what thing happened in Georgia that changed the story for the Cherokee? What was discovered in Georgia? It's discovered other places we run Native Americans out of. Gold. Very good. Gold was discovered in Cherokee land in Georgia. And when this gold was discovered, what do you think white settlers did? They tried to force the tribe to sign that removal treaty, right? They wanted them out of there, just like they wanted the Indians out of the Black Hills, which leads to the Battle of the Little Bighorn later. They wanted them out of there, and they refused to go. They weren't stupid, right? They knew they were setting on something good. So when gold was discovered in Cherokee lands in Georgia, white settlers tried to force the tribe to sign the removal treaty. When they wouldn't do it, the government of Georgia decided to seize Cherokee lands. They decided to threaten to seize Cherokee lands. Well, if you won't move off them, we'll just take them. Now, where would they appeal to if they didn't agree with that decision? Where would these Cherokee Indian tribes that are very organized, where would they appeal to?
Other tribes.
Well, you might think that's a good guess. Where would you think? Where would they appeal to? How?
Through the court systems.
Which, can you believe it? Yeah, they appealed through the Supreme Court. I mean, how many Indian tribes would be organized enough to take their case to the Supreme Court that they thought that these people in Georgia were illegal in seizing their lands? Guess who the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was when they took it there? John Marshall. Remember the guy that was one of the midnight appointments that turned out to be really good? Chief Justice John Marshall would be the man that would rule on this appeal by the Cherokee Indians that the government of Georgia could not take their lands. It was their lands. How do you think Chief Justice Marshall ruled? For or against the Indians? How many think he ruled for? How many think he ruled against? He ruled for them. He ruled that the state of Georgia had no jurisdiction over the tribe and they had no claim to their lands. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court ruled, John Marshall, that Georgia had no justification over the tribe at all and had absolutely no right to claim their lands. Well, Georgia officials ignored the ruling. They ignored it. So who would the Indian tribes, who would the Cherokee tribe have to go to make sure that that was acted on upon the way it was ruled? Who would be the next person that would decide that?
President.
President of the United States, Jackson. I bet that went over big. Here's Jackson's comment. When Georgia officials ignored the ruling and President Jackson got involved, he said, quote, "Mr. Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." That was President Jackson's comment when they went to him. Mr. Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. So Jackson's telling you what? He doesn't care what the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court said. What's he believe in? The power of the presidency. Okay? He doesn't really care what John Marshall said. And he said, Mr. Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it.
Wait, he was in Marshall?
Yeah, he was in Marshall. Yep. Well, unfortunately, in 1835, some of the Cherokee leaders agreed to accept the Western land in exchange if they would be peacefully relocated. So some of the Cherokee leaders finally said, this is a fight we're never going to win. We'll agree to move if you agree to peacefully relocate us. This agreement between some of the Cherokee leaders to accept Western land in exchange for being relocated became known as the Treaty of New Echota. The Treaty of New Echota was a treaty that was signed between the federal government and some of the Cherokee leaders stating they would agree to move to Western lands in exchange for peaceful relocation. In other words, they wouldn't be allowed to relocate without pressure, right? Or force. So that treaty was called the Treaty of New Echota. And who signed it? Some of the Cherokee leaders. Okay? Other Cherokee Indians under the leadership of Chief John Ross resisted the Indian Removal Act to the bitter end. Other Indians under the leadership of John Ross, Chief John Ross, resisted until the bitter end. So as some Cherokee leaders agreed to the Treaty of New Echota, which allowed them to move to Western land, relocated in a peaceful manner, other Cherokees under the leadership of Chief John Ross resisted until the bitter end. We'll tell you tomorrow that the bitter end is going to go down in history as the Trail of Tears. Okay? We'll talk about that tomorrow. All right, nice job. I'll get those quizzes corrected by the end of the day as well.